And everybody. Hello, hello, welcome everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde. On va attendre, il y a encore quelques personnes qui se joignent à nous. Just wait a few seconds as people are trickling in. All right, so I guess we can get started. So thank you everyone for joining us for the very last session of our Living Soil Symposium. It's hard to believe the week really just flew by. So this session is called Decolonizing Water and Preparing Next Steps. It's both a presentation and followed by a workshop. Bonjour tout le monde. Alors merci de vous joindre à nous pour la toute dernière session du symposium cette année. C'est difficile d'y croire, mais on est déjà rendu là. Alors la session d'aujourd'hui s'appelle Décoloniser l'eau et préparer les prochaines étapes. Ce sera donc à la fois une présentation suivie d'un atelier. So just again, before we get started, you've been hearing the same things over and over again this week, just to talk about simultaneous translation. So the session will be bilingual. The first part, the presentation part, will be in English. And then the second part will be bilingual. So we're offering simultaneous translation for the first part, and for the second part, we'll just be going back and forth to make sure that everybody understands. So I'm just going to explain the translation tool, the interpretation tool in French. Donc, comme d'habitude, on offre la traduction simultanée pour la première partie de la session aujourd'hui. Donc, juste pour la partie présentation qui sera en anglais. Et ensuite, pour la deuxième partie, pour l'atelier, ça va être bilingue. Donc, on va parler en anglais et en français pour s'assurer que tout le monde puisse bien comprendre. Donc, pour écouter la première partie en français, vous commencez à connaître un peu comment ça fonctionne. Vous pouvez sélectionner l'icône interprétation et choisir la langue française. Donc, l'icône serait en bas de votre écran, soit en cliquant sur les trois petits points ou sur More ou Plus. Sinon, ça serait en haut de votre écran si vous êtes sur une tablette. Puis si vous avez toujours, si vous ne voyez toujours pas la fonction, bien, vous allez peut-être devoir mettre à jour votre Zoom. Donc, vous pouvez aller faire ça. Ça prend juste quelques minutes, puis revenir vous joindre à nous. Si jamais il y a quelque chose qui ne fonctionne pas, n'hésitez pas à écrire dans le chat. Donc, on va vous répondre rapidement. Quelqu'un de l'équipe va vous répondre rapidement. So I'll switch back to English now. We should all be able to understand. Can I get a few raised hands just to see who here is using the interpretation tool? A few raised hands or a couple of reactions or thumbs up. Okay, great. Perfect. I see that it's working. Wonderful. Again, if there's anything, if you're having any technical issues or anything like that, please feel free to write that in the chat. So just before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the head office of Regeneration Canada is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka are recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters, and Tiohtià:ke Montreal is known as a historic gathering place for many Indigenous peoples. Our members and friends are spread from coast to coast to coast, living on and working lands that have been cared for by First Nation, Métis, or Inuit for a very long time. So now I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm Sarah, co-director at Regeneration Canada. So I'll be the host for this final session, and I'm here with my colleague Aviva, who's going to be helping me make sure everything goes smoothly. Do you want to say hi, Aviva?
Hi, everybody.
Yes, that being said, everybody, if you could keep your mics on mute just to avoid any background noise during the session, that'd be great, but feel free to keep your video on. We'd love to see all your beautiful faces, so feel free to keep that on. Okay, so now that we've done the little orientation or the housekeeping, we can get started with a quick overview of today's session. So as I was mentioning, we'll start with a presentation by Zach Weiss. Then we'll have a short Q&A. And then after, we'll go into the workshop, which is downstream preparing next steps for individual and collective action with Leah Weinberg. And then we'll finish off with a few parting words, a few closing words at the very end from the Regeneration Canada team. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the first part of the session. So Zach Weiss, protege of revolutionary Austrian farmer Sepp Holzer. Zach is the first person to earn the Holzer practitioner certification directly from Sepp through a rigorous 2-year apprenticeship. Blending a unique combination of systems thinking, empathy, and awareness, Zach created elemental ecosystems to provide an action-oriented process to improve clients' relationship with their landscape. Elemental Ecosystems is an ecological development, contracting, and consulting firm specializing in watershed restoration and ecosystem regeneration. The organization has worked in 19 countries over 5 continents, spanning a wide range of climates, contexts, landforms, and ecosystems. So today, Zach is going to be discussing about how colonization has destabilized the Earth's water cycles, resulting in extreme climate and catastrophic weather events. So without further ado, Zach, I pass it on to you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be speaking with you all today about a topic that I'm really passionate about, decolonizing water. If I'm going to boil this down into 3 easy take-home messages, it's that water is Earth's blood. It's life on this planet. And a lot of these complex things we're going to discuss become really simple if you just draw that analogy with your own body. Colonization has disrupted the water cycle, and it's actually disrupted the balance of our climate as a result. And we can fix this. This is a situation that's happened and something we can remedy. So the first piece there, water really is the blood of the earth. And when you look around the earth, you can see how it is that blood. And the architecture of the earth actually mirrors the architecture of our own bodies with the rivers and creeks like veins. But it doesn't just stop there. It's actually the trees are functioning as the lungs of the planet and circulating this atmospheric water, which is really critical to life on this planet. And it's a system called the biotic pump. And so when water evaporates off of the ocean, in order for that water to form cloud droplets and rain, it needs a nuclei to form around. Up in the mountains, those nuclei can be ice crystals, but in the rest of the place, sometimes it's salts, but by and large, it's hygroscopic microorganisms. These are microorganisms produced within the leaves of trees that gather water and coalesce water into droplets, forming clouds and then rain. That phase change, as water goes from very voluminous to really small, creates a vacuum, creates low pressure that draws in more moisture from the coast. Then with the ground being shaded and rich and cool, it's actually able to absorb all of that water. That water feeds into the ground, into the earth body, and comes back as springs, creeks, lakes. And so this is a really dynamic cycle where water is actually circulated from the ocean through the land and then back again. And on top of that, there's the small water cycle, which is water that's locally evaporated, condensed, and then falls as rain. And that's on average 50% of the rainfall we receive. And when you look at this place, this is a tree, it's Big Mama. This is a tree that was on Turtle Island before Columbus arrived. And when this tree was young, you could drink out of any body of water on Turtle Island, any lake, any stream, any river, because the Indigenous people really had a stewardship ethic of care and of reverence and understanding the sanctity of life. Now, this tree is later on in its life, and in Minnesota, the land of 1,000 lakes, they found that no lake met the state's quality standards for fishable or swimmable. So we've gone from drinkable everywhere to entire areas that are so polluted that there's not even one single lake that's considered fishable or swimmable. This is colonized land management versus Indigenous land management. This is New York City. And so these are really different worldviews. On the left here, you have the Indigenous worldview where everything is sacred and you understand the interconnectedness of life and how everything has a role and everything has a purpose. On the right here, you have the colonial worldview where everything has energy in order to be exploited. And this really, it comes from the monarchs. It comes from people sending others to places in order to extract resources and then bring those to the mother colony. And so we can look around the world and see the impacts of colonization. This is the Fertile Crescent, the Levant. It was the birthplace of agriculture. At one point, it was one of the most productive river basins in the world. 10,000 years ago, the plow was invented here, animals were domesticated, and they started a process of extractive land management. Now the result is this humid desert where it doesn't rain because they've disturbed the vegetation, they've disturbed the moisture cycles, and they've actually disturbed the climate. So here's another example of that. 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, the Sahara, when those same techniques and strategies moved into the Sahara, it went from this rich savanna full of life to this desert that it is today. The Tibetan Plateau, same story, even more interesting though. The Tibetan Plateau was contiguously inhabited for 20,000 years, yet when colonization came there 6,000 years ago, that's what actually caused the desertification of this region. And how do they know? They can look in the soil and sediment core samples within lakes and see pollen from trees that no longer grow there, but that used to in recent history. In Australia, there was a geological event from colonization. What happened here is when the British colonized, they abused the land so badly, and the land was so sensitive because it's the oldest continent on Earth. What actually happened here was they so overgrazed that all of the bad soils from the highlands actually washed in and covered up the alluvial soils in the floodplains. And so now you have this situation where you have rich soil, but it's actually buried under a foot of poor soil from all this severe erosion from colonization. And the scary part for me is we're getting better at it. We're no longer just doing this with the plow and domesticated animals. We're doing this with pavement, with concrete, with giant drainage systems. And we're becoming much more effective at this colonization of water, this constant shunting away of water. And it's resulting in really big issues. You know, when you push all that water somewhere else, what do you get? Of course you get flooding. And then when you have flooding, the next logical thing is you're going to have drought because all of that water isn't going into the ground. It isn't servicing the earth body. It's running away. And then in the worst cases, you get fire because you've desertified the landscape so much that these horrific fires come through and burn up what vegetation is left. Now this leads to huge issues for human quality of life: food scarcity, water scarcity, starvation, refugee crises, and these are all the result of colonization, really. And when you look at the world, you can see how much of the world really was colonized. And it's not just the colonization that was a problem, but then the worldview shift because of colonization. Because even though in a lot of places they're not actively being colonized anymore, they still carry that same worldview that is abusive by nature towards the landscape. And over the last 10,000 years, we've desertified 1/3 of the Earth's land. And if you look, it really overlaps with that colonization as well. And so slowly, for greed, humans were extracting resources from landscapes, turning life into just energy and resources, and then moving those to places to accumulate wealth. This is the watershed death spiral, and this is a feedback loop. So what happens as we clear land, that land is exposed, it becomes hot. On the hot land, it's like a sponge, and when a sponge is really dry, it can't even absorb the water at first. So when the rains do come, they all run downhill, causing flooding, but then because that water didn't infiltrate, there's flooding, but there's also drought. And the water table is sinking even though there is flooding. Now, not just that, you get these high pressure systems. So this humidity off the coast, it's low pressure by nature. Low pressure can't move to high pressure. So as you build up those heat domes, you're actually increasing the pressure on the coast and you're preventing that moisture conveyor belt from entering until eventually the power is so strong that it overwhelms that wall and it creates these huge catastrophic weather events, but then with longer periods of drought in between. And so this is a consistent cycle that reduces the quality of vegetation and reduces the consistency of the water cycle. This is a hydrograph. This is flow of water through the system over time. And this comes from the great Walter Jenne, who I've seen is presenting, and he gave some really great talks. This all came directly from him, so big shout out to him. You have the same amount of water in each of these situations, but you have two different ways that water is processed by the land. The red line, it's all runoff because you have this concrete, hard landscape with really dense soils, high temperature, and so no infiltration is able to happen. The blue situation, you have this rich, vegetated, lush landscape where the soil is at a loose bulk density, the soil is at a low temperature, and it's shaded. Now, what really happens here as well is you're changing your length of photosynthetic growth. In the green situation, you have green photosynthetic growth year round, and so you have those trees cooling the air 590 calories per gram of water they transpire. In the other situation, you just have the earth absorbing more heat and getting hotter and hotter. Now, the big thing here is with this situation where it's all draining away, you're actually designing the flood. And so you're designing erosion, you're designing risk, you're designing the cost for the repairs of that. Then you have the insurance to cover the risk exposure. Then you have the finance charges because you can't afford any of that. But by nature, you're also designing in the next drought and the next fire because you designed the flood, which comes with its own erosion, risk, cost, insurance, finance. And it's creating this situation that's really just not viable for farmers anymore. And this is that in action, and you can see just gut check, you can see the difference in land management practices and the difference in health. I don't have to show you anything other than this picture to understand the water cycles in the left are healthy and the water cycles in the right are broken. And so these are feedback loops. As we spin down this watershed death spiral, the intensity is increasing, but we can also get that going the other direction. We can actually rehydrate landscapes, revegetate landscapes, and restart the biotic pump. So this is my mentor, Sepp Holzer, really amazing person who taught me you always look first to nature for answers. And he's done some really amazing things throughout the world. This is the Tamara Peace Research Community. They were a community that didn't know if they had enough water to survive, and they came to him. This is that same landscape. And this is just with water from the sky. They have these long periods, 11 months of drought, and then 1 month of flooding rains. Now, what's really interesting, the neighbors downstream were really against this because they said, you're stealing our water, but now they love it because they have steady year-round springs fed by this water retention landscape, because the idea is not to hold the water, but actually return it to the earth. And so here what they did is they undid the road, which was draining the landscape, and they created a retention body, which then recharged the landscape. Now this community is water self-sufficient. Their wells are all recharged by their own work on site, and they have spring water, plenty of water for irrigation, agriculture, and it's a thriving community. This is my mentor's farm, the Krameterhof. This was a place is thought to be too high, too cold, too hard to do anything, yet he created this diverse, interconnected Garden of Eden by always looking first to nature and treating nature with love and respect, and working with the framework that nature is perfect. If there's a mistake, it's on my part, and I need to better understand nature in order to improve the situation. So it's left me with this understanding of environmental footprint. When we talk about environmental footprint, everyone's talking about how to reduce their negative environmental footprint. I want to have the largest environmental footprint possible, because I know our environmental footprint can be positive. If we're only working in having a less negative footprint, we're never going to have a positive footprint. We're never going to have a neutral footprint. And so we're using machines and we're using technology to try and have that positive impact for future generations. This is another mentor of mine, Rajendra Singh, the Water Gandhi of India. And there in India, they've created this amazing community movement of watershed restoration. He started 35 years ago hand digging this johad, trained by the indigenous elders in the community. And when the people saw the water come back in the wells downstream from this johad, they all joined him. And now they've converted this whole region. This is just one project. This is a community that it was dying because they just didn't have any water. They drilled 27 boreholes, all dry. For that same price, they put in this one retention body, And that community went from 9 hectares of agriculture to 650. They paid for the cost of the dam 4 times over in their first year in increase in agricultural productivity. And this will serve for generations. It'll serve their children for generations. In this region, they've restored 7 rivers to perennial flow. They've restored 250,000 wells that were dry that have water again. They've impacted 1 million people, actually causing the reverse migration because life in the country has become possible again with water. And not only is this a human quality of life, but it starts to affect all these different things. In India, when there's not enough water, the female of the household goes to get the water. And if she doesn't have enough time during the day to do that, the female children stay home to help her carry the water. And so now in this region, where female children weren't going to school because they had to help the mother carry water all day, now by bringing water back to the communities, these children are now going to school again. So very quickly, a water health issue becomes a gender issue as well, and it causes this whole ripple effect through the community. And so it's my firm belief that the privatization of water is criminal, and it should be prosecuted as such. You don't need to go farther than Australia to see the example of what happens when we let water supplies become privatized. In Australia, you have situations where the Indigenous people haven't received water for 2 or 3 years in some places. Fish are flopping around in the dry riverbeds dying, yet farmers are wasting water to artificially increase the price even higher because the people who own it were making great money on it. And if we allow this to happen around the world, we're going to be in a Mad Max World War water kind of scenario. And so it's really important that we band together as people and stand against the privatization of this fundamental common good. And not just that, but you have these entire situations where people are polluting the water, and all the restoration or regeneration we can do in the world isn't going to undo some of those things. And so I really applaud the Indigenous water protectors and all the water protectors who are standing against these pollution issues, because we really need a lot of help. Water really needs a lot of help, and we all have to work together in order to accomplish it. And so it was really powerful to see the talks at the beginning of the weeks with Mary and Dawn and all the work they're doing with the water walks. And we really need a global decentralized movement around giving water personhood and giving water rights. On top of that, I think we need urgent legislation that gives people the ability to steward their water and their land. Right now, the system is all so broken that people can't even do their part in helping. And we really need to open up some of this legislation in order to allow people to properly steward their landscapes. And it's our choice. It's our choice as a global community. Do we want a world of desert and watershed death spiral? We can keep going down this path until we're extinct if we want to. Or do we want to step into the new water paradigm? Do we really want to rehydrate, revegetate landscapes and restore the water cycle in order to achieve a better common future? So this is something I'm really passionate about. We've just started, we're in the early phases of developing an online community that we want to be a central point for people working with water. So, because it's about community-driven, decentralized water retention. If we can create that around the world, we will change the world. We will bring peace to the world, because there's no peace without water. And so if this kind of thing interests you, waterstories.app, it's really young right now, but this will be built out as a resource so that people can learn to do these things for themselves, can find others doing these things in their community, and can really connect with one another. So if I can leave you with anything, this decolonization of water, it's dire. We need to do this or we're headed towards a really bad scenario. But that also starts with decolonizing your mind. Colonization has been so widespread and it's impacted so much of our global worldview. If you want to decolonize your mind, I think you start with love and respect for water and nature. Nature's not for control. Nature's not for exploitation. Nature's not for making money. Nature is for love, respect, and gratitude. And if you spend time with water, you go to places and you allow your mind to quiet, you can really let this love and respect for water and nature teach you everything you need to know. And that's my whole spiel. I hope you guys will really come together and help us create the new water paradigm, will come together and help us regenerate the earth. If you want to learn more, you can visit waterstories.app, you can visit elementalecosystems.com, because really we need all of us. You know, it's great that I'm doing this around the world, but I can't even make a drop in the bucket. We need to come together as a global community in order to achieve a better common future for all of our children, for future generations, but also just for life on Earth. So that's, yeah, I think we got a little bit of time for questions and answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Zach. Here, I'm just going to put this back to gallery mode. Great. Thank you so much. That was really amazing. And thank you for finishing off on a hopeful note also. I really love that. There's no peace without water. I think that's really beautiful. So thanks a lot. And you really set the stage for what's coming next also for our workshop. So thanks for that. So we do have a few minutes for questions. So I would invite anybody who would like to ask a question to raise their hand. So by using the raise your hand function, if you go under participants, you click on more and raised hand, or you go in reactions and you click on raise hands, and then I can give you, you can open your mic and just pose your question to Zach. If not, feel comfortable also writing a question in the chat, and we can get to those questions there as well. So is there anybody that would have a question for Zach? I see something coming up in the chat already here from Alex. Okay, so how do we stop the privatization of water?
Oh God, that's a big issue that I'm very passionate about, but I don't have the answers for yet. I think there's a lot of movements around the world really giving personhood and rights to rivers and water. That certainly helps. I think that's a vital first step. But we also need to, we're at this elementary stage. For example, in the US, water futures have just started being traded on Wall Street. If we tolerate this now, that is our future. So we need a movement, you know, something like Occupy Wall Street that really says we're not going to allow this to happen. And we need civil courage and also dissent of the laws that go against nature. So, you know, it's hard. It's a big problem. There's a lot of money working against it. Rajendra, there were 73 legal cases against him from the government because they were storing water for communities and taking water away from the governments and municipalities that were making great money off of that water. So there's a lot of corporate interests at play. You even come into the World Water Forum is actually a shill for Coca-Cola and Nestle to convince third world countries to privatize their water supply. So I think it starts with awareness and a global awakening and coming together as people to just say, no, we're not going to tolerate this, much like you see with the farmer movement in India right now.
Absolutely. Thanks. Okay, we have another question here in the chat from earlier on in your presentation when you were talking about desertification all over the world. Someone's asking, so what is the evidence that the desertification of the Sahara is due to colonization? So where are you coming from with that information?
Yeah, the time frame that the tools of the plow and domesticated animals came to the region, about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. And then independently, if you look at ecological timeframes, that's when the ecosystem really started to change. Now, there's a lot of variables. Other things could have happened, of course. But regardless, it's a pattern that you see with extractive land management and desertification.
Right. Thanks. So I don't see any other questions right away in the chat. If anybody also wants to just share you know, their impressions and their takeaways after Zach's talk as well, please feel free to turn your mic on or to raise your hand, or if you have any specific questions. We still have some time for discussion, so really feel free to raise your hand. Or oh, David, I see you're raising your hand.
Hi. So I know Maud Barlow, who started the Council of Canadians, has been very active in around water privatization and mobilizing communities to vote against it. I just wondered what your take on it, Zach, is because I know she's been working with the United Nations to get water recognized as a human right, and I think she was successful in that so far. But anyway, if you just want to say a couple of words about that.
Yeah, and I know of Maud, but I'm not super familiar with her work. I think it's all great steps forward, and the more we can bring awareness of these issues, the better. Absolutely. And we're at this point where just the more we can do, the better. Different avenues, different routes, whatever we can do. You look at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and it all looks good. But I also think it comes down to community action. One of the things that the UN loves is to just talk about stuff forever and not really do anything. And what I saw in India was the projects that the communities led were very successful. The very same projects that the government led were total failures. And so without that community buy-in piece, you really can't move forward in a meaningful way. But I think we really need a top-down approach as well, where we're hitting both. There's no reason we shouldn't go to those, but to expect that to solve all of our issues, I think is incomplete.
I think a lot of people agree with you on that one. I saw a lot of people nodding their heads. Okay, we have here Andres that has his hand raised. You can go ahead, Andres.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Thanks. So Zach, you had a question in terms of the, so you're saying like the movement is relatively new. So how is it, like what's the organization like? So how are decisions being made? How do people participate? What's the intended structure of it? Because you said something like ground up and decentralized, but I mean, that could mean a whole bunch of different things, right?
You're speaking to the organization that I mentioned, or?
Yes, you said there was like some
the Water Stories.
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
What we're at first, Water Stories is really going to be a knowledge hub. So the idea is all this knowledge that I've gained from various elders, how do we condense that all into one place online and then really create a place where people can start to interact? We've just launched this. All we have right now is a survey for people to fill out. If you go to waterstories.app, that will lead you to the survey, because what we want to do is make sure we build something that's really useful for the future practitioners. So we're very early on. The community is non-existent now, but we're going to start building this out over the series of the next months. We'll start with some question and answer videos to basically start to understand what people really need to know to move into the work in a meaningful way.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay, next we have a question from Christina.
Hi, Zach. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm wondering if you have any knowledge on how we can implement these sorts of ideas in schools, because I totally agree that it starts with community. And I think some people were asking a question in the previous presentation today on how we can kind of converse with our neighbors that regenerative practices are good. And I think a lot of that has to do with how humans are raised and finding these things out early on and getting their hands dirty in this kind of work early on. So I'm wondering if you've dabbled at all in that kind of education.
I totally agree. The real path forward here is educating future generations to be better than us, and to understand things better than us. Part of what this Water Stories will be eventually is all sorts of teachers' aids and activities that can be done in the classroom for young people, middle-aged, adult learners, the whole spectrum. And just one little anecdote that I think really drives that point home. My mentor worked on projects in Russia that were for these kids with emotional issues, and they started a garden, and they found at first the kids were just destroying anything that was living, the plants, the insects, killing them all. But as they started to learn about it, their whole worldview changed. And now they started fighting over the earthworms to bring them to their plants and the seeds, because they knew that the earthworms were going to help their plants. And so very quickly with kids, you can change that. It's easier to change the more neuroplasticity we have. And so if we can intervene with kids, get them to love and respect nature, all of these issues are going to resolve themselves moving forward.
Great, thank you. You couldn't see, but I was laughing pretty hard at the story. So thank you so much for the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thanks, Christina. Okay, next we have a question from Nancy.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm wondering if you have information on strategies to work with local municipalities and getting them to change their water policies.
Yeah, I think the first piece of that really comes to just being a voice for water and a voice for the voiceless. So people going to town hall and speaking up for water issues, and speaking up for how things will impact the water. That's a very big piece. You know, eventually I'd love to have some kind of handbook best practices that you could give to people like that. But I think long-term, what it potentially looks like is turning the Department of Transportation into the Department of Transportation and Water Retention, because they already have access to all the land that would be needed for something this scale. They already have access to the equipment, the budgets, and for a 20 to 30% increase in their operating budget, they could start doing water retention with parts of every new road project. And roads are such a big part of the problem because it's these huge networks of hard surfaces designed to drain the water away as quickly as possible.
Did that answer your question, Nancy? Okay, great. So next we have a question from Zephyr.
Didarjaku, greetings all my relations, all around this ancient grandmother Earth. My name is Zephyr Elise. I am one of those water protectors that for the last 10 years has been fighting and being imprisoned over and over again, trying to make sure that people understand that water is a human right to all beings of this earth. And since we are decolonizing, I have to lift my hands to my Nuna, my Nawa, my Zapotec, my Huichol, my Purapech, and all unknown ancestors across Turtle Islands who have given me their teachings in my blood from this land that holds them and that will hold me when I return to it. But I also say that water is mother's blood and it flows to all nations. And in that way, I can greet each of you in a good way and shake the hand of your heart for gathering and caring about this land and coming together. I offer hands lifted to this relative for keeping his heart and his spirit open, for listening to the wisdoms that have come, and being a voice for those who cannot speak, or to those who cannot hear when those of us who have been speaking these cannot be heard. And to you personally, I say, every time I got beat at Standing Rock relative, every time I couldn't sleep or I was scared, I didn't know why I was at Standing Rock and why I stayed there. You are showing me that you are the answer when I asked, why am I doing this? So thank you. Thank you for doing this. This is heavy work. This is hard work. This is dangerous work. But without this work, there is no other work on this planet. After all of that, my question is, what is the reaction when you present this to a room full of folks who love that profit of profit, who love extraction, who believe in destruction as the only way? What do they say, or can they even hear it?
Wow, thank you for that. I so appreciate what you do and sharing that with all of us. And that was powerful words spoken. So really thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. I can't say I've actually had that experience yet, because I think by nature, when I'm speaking, it kind of self-selects for the people who already care about the earth. So while I would relish that opportunity and look forward to it, I've never spoken to a group of politicians. I've had some good interactions one-on-one by directing the narrative to things that hit their goals. But I myself would love to see the response in a room like that.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll have time for maybe one or two last questions. So I see we have a question here from Antonius.
Yes, hi, Zach. So Canadian folks, especially in urban context, are known to be the worst in terms of water consumption per capita per year. I just wanted to hear from you, what message could we have all together as urban dwellers, how to respect water in our, in our home and where we live?
It's a great question. That water that you spend time with every day and thank for your sustenance, that could be the water from the tap in your apartment in the city. It doesn't need to be wild water to be thanked and to be grateful for. But on top of that, people in the city have an access to governance that people in the country do not. And so I think the way this plays out, if we're all working together, it's people in the city going to the governance and demanding change, because the farmers out in the landscape, they can do their work with the land. The people in the city, they need to do their work with the people. And so being public points of outreach for this kind of awareness, and then also holding governance and politicians accountable.
So true. Does that answer, Tony? Did you have anything else to add?
Thanks, Zach.
Great. Okay, we'll take one last question from Morabo.
Merci. J'ai aimé l'exposé, mais il y a une question que je voulais poser. J'aimerais savoir quelles sont les stratégies que vous utilisez pour recycler l'eau. Parce que vous avez parlé que rétablir le cycle de l'eau pour améliorer le futur et il n'y a pas de paix sans eau. Mais quelles sont les stratégies que vous utilisez pour améliorer cette qualité ou bien la qualité du cycle de l'eau ou bien améliorer le cycle de l'eau?
Happy to translate, Zach, if you...
Yes,
So Maraba was asking what techniques would you use to recycle water in terms of...
So there's great, biological processes have a really amazing ability to, so it depends on which level of reuse you want to have. There are places and ecosystems and systems where people filter water from sewage water to drinking water through a series of biological processes, through moving that through a system of wetlands. If you want to reclaim and clean sewage water, there are really nice 3 lagoon wetland systems that enable that. But the most important in reusing water is to try and keep your black water and your gray water separate, because gray water is really easy to process and reuse. Black water is a whole different level of complexity. So that's poo water and non-poo water in simple terms. And if you're reusing gray water, if that's from a kitchen sink, you want to give some thought to an oil trap. So basically moving it and separating out the oil from the water as it moves through your system into whatever kind of storage you have, and then some kind of solids trap as well. But that's a big piece of this whole thing, is it's not how much water we have, but how many times we reuse it before it leaves us. So can we reuse the same water 10 times, or are we just using it once and sending it downhill?
Est-ce que ça répond bien à votre question, Morabo? Oh, Morabo, does that answer your question?
Oui, oui. Ouais, pas vraiment. Je verrais. En fait, j'ai demandé plus des stratégies que vous utilisez pour rétablir le cycle d'eau.
Les stratégies pour rétablir les cycles d'eau.
Oui.
Donc, c'est ça. So strategies to reestablish the water cycle. I guess I didn't understand correctly.
Okay, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. You know, the biggest, easiest one is conserve the water and conserve the greenery. If you're doing those two things, you are facilitating the water cycle by nature. So anywhere where you can create some areas that hold water and return it to the ground, and everywhere where you can conserve the vegetation, that, you know, from that sexology of land and water, a new world arises automatically. And so when you're working with land, water, and vegetation and conserving those three, whatever you're doing is going to be helping facilitate the water cycle.
Ça répond mieux, Marapo?
Merci.
Parfait, merci. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's the time that we have for questions. Thank you again, Zach, for a really great presentation, and thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you, Zephyr, also for sharing the work that you do. Thank you so much for that.